Well, Eddie Howe has just met the media here at Newcastle United's training ground, and yet again the only subject in town appears to be Alexander Isak. And what a week it has been behind the scenes at Newcastle. Not much talk of football, just talk of two statements, one released by Alexander Isak, the other released by the club in response to his claims about broken promises. Eddie Howe pushed on a few of those sort of segments that have sort of erupted this week, but I think realistically where Eddie Howe is standing, he's got to get that message, the right message, into the public domain about keeping everybody else motivated ahead of what is a huge game against Liverpool that never normally needs any fuel, any extra sort of distractions around the subject of Liverpool v Newcastle. We know the history of this fixture, but I think today Eddie basically again saying he does not want Alexander Isak to leave. He would prefer that he was in training, which suggests to me that Alexander Isak is still refusing to play ball, so to speak, and going into what's a huge fixture. It leaves Newcastle without one of the star players, which Eddie made very clear in his press conference today about how Newcastle, are going to get to a point where they're going to have to make a decision on what happens next. They can't go into the season without a recognised striker coming in, a marquee signing, whatever you would like to call it, and Alexander Isak simply just then sold to Liverpool without a replacement. It's just unthinkable. So today Eddie Howe saying that Alexander Isak continues to train alone and won't be involved against Liverpool at St James's Park, and now this game has a totally different narrative to what it had when the fixture list was generated back in June because of what's happened since. I asked Eddie Howe if he'd spoken to Alexander Isak at the end of last season. Now this is a claim that's already been made, that Alexander Isak told Newcastle 2 weeks before the end of the season whether he wanted to stay at the club. Did he make it clear to Newcastle, did he make it clear to Eddie Howe that he wanted to leave St James's Park? And Eddie Howe basically admitting that he did hold conversations with Alexander Isak. I asked him if he knew then whether he wanted to leave. He said that conversation has to remain private. So read into that what you will. Eddie Howe basically saying that not a lot has changed behind the scenes since the statements were released this week, but it sets it up for Monday night's game at St James's Park, a game which Newcastle probably need to make sure they get something from. It'd be a huge ask to beat the champions, but you never know. Newcastle with a crowd behind them have got every chance. But again, Alexander Isak dominating the press conference this morning down here at the club's media centre. So yeah, that's the situation with Alexander Isak, and going into this game against Liverpool, in normal circumstances it's difficult enough against a team that are capable of winning the title again, or capable of winning the Champions League, and a couple of cups thrown in. Obviously Newcastle beat Liverpool in the Carabao Cup final last year, and that's a result Newcastle fans will always cherish, and it's one that probably gives this game that extra bit of spice. But for me, Eddie Howe will not want the whole distraction of what's been going on with Alexander Isak, and he was very clear in his press conference that Newcastle can't go into the new season after the window shuts without that recognised marquee striker, whatever you want to call it. And I think that's pretty clear and obvious to everybody. Anthony Gordon stands by to take on his boyhood team, and yeah, it's one that Newcastle against Aston Villa, Anthony Gordon for me did work extremely hard, had some opportunities in the game. I think he had the most shots of any Newcastle player, but ultimately Newcastle couldn't win the game. and without a striker, haven't had a week to reflect on it. Newcastle, couldn't get the job done, couldn't get 3 points. That's something that, it's a concern, especially given how free-flowing at times Newcastle were last season. But I guess the only option Eddie Howe's got is Anthony Gordon at the minute. He could put William Masula in. Just seems to be lacking that experience, that big game experience. But in pre-season he was getting into the positions, and we saw in the under-21s finals that he can be a match winner on his day. So certainly Eddie Howe in there saying he's got something to work with there as we move forward. But experience is the key for any young player as well. Leaning into a player like Isak in training every day is only going to make William Masula better, as will be the case for anyone who may come in. But I think this situation now, it's tested everybody at Newcastle United. It's tested Eddie Howe. He's just had to sit in a press conference there again, answer lots of questions about Isak, questions that have to be asked. And it's a saga, and it's rumbled on all the way through the summer. It took up all the pre-season, all the airtime in pre-season. It's taken up all the airtime in the start of the new season, and it's just one that Eddie Howe, as a manager, as a head coach, he's someone who likes to get on the training pitch with the players. I watched him over in South Korea, and he still does that central bit in training where he will stand in the centre circle and the players will hang on every word. He doesn't need this situation. He doesn't need any suggestions that some players are in favour of Alexander Isak or some aren't. Whatever the talk is behind the scenes, he does not need that at this moment in time, especially going into a game against Liverpool. But now, Monday's game, Liverpool showed last week, beating Bournemouth 4-2, that they're just going to try and pick up where they left off last season. And I think that's got to be a fear for Newcastle. But St James's Park, as we know, can be absolutely jumping in situations like this. We know that the fans will relish this game, under the lights. Liverpool coming to town, the champions coming to town. It doesn't need me or anybody else to build it up any more than it's going to be built up, and it would be so huge anyway had Alexander Isak been fully committed to Newcastle or not. So yeah, it's a massive game. The fixture list, when it was generated, if you'd offered me 6 or 7 points from the first 3 games, I'd have been absolutely delighted with that. Newcastle got 1 against Aston Villa, didn't get a huge result against Liverpool, and then go to Leeds and get something. Then we'll see what happens. But this is a test now, a huge test for everybody, and let's hope Newcastle United can really push on and show, perhaps even demonstrate to Alexander Isak how ambitious everybody is still at Newcastle United. First domestic trophy in 70 years. Last season, we're going to be watching the Champions League draw this time next week. So it's an exciting time for the football club. Let's not escape from that. We can't allow this to dominate the headlines, because Newcastle can put results together on the pitch still, and by the end of the window, hopefully, they do have exactly what they need. That's what was suggested by Eddie Howe in his press conference, that by the end of the window he hopes everything is settled. And Eddie Howe will hope by the end of the window that his 11 on paper is as strong as we all know it can be, because I've said this for a long time. I've said with Isak and the players Newcastle have signed, and with the 11 that dominated last season, it could be one of the strongest sides in the Premier League. It certainly could be one of Newcastle's strongest ever teams, on paper in the top flight. So we can't escape that. But with the Isak situation, as I say, rumbling on, Newcastle, going to be questioned. Who comes in? Can they sort of pick up where Isak left off last season? It's a hard task for anybody, and you wouldn't want to put too much pressure on anybody who's going to do that, because at the end of the day, the window now is virtually coming to an end. All the top targets Newcastle wanted, they didn't get, and a lot of players turned Newcastle down. That's, you know, their decision, but Newcastle can't just allow themselves to be sort of pushed around by Liverpool or any other football club. If they feel that keeping Isak on board is the best option, then that's something they're going to have to do. They're going to have to come to a decision. But yeah, it hasn't been easy. But yeah, I'll sign off then now. Full coverage of the game on Monday night to come. I'm sure there'll be a few more headlines before the weekend even gets underway. It's only Friday and there's still so much to write about from what we just witnessed in that press conference. So keep an eye on that, and I'll catch up with you next time.